At dawn over northern France in 1944, the sky was a pale bruise streaked with contrails and the rumble of engines that made the air itself vibrate. And Captain Jack "Hawk" Turner tightened his grip on the control stick of his P-47 Thunderbolt as the ground far below dissolved into a checkerboard of fog-washed fields and burning armor columns. Because this wasn't just another patrol. This was payback for weeks of ridicule from German pilots who called his plane a flying milk cow, too heavy, too slow, too American to survive in the real war. A week earlier, a Luftwaffe ace named Dieter Cross had radioed mockingly over the open channel after downing two inexperienced Allied flyers. "Bring me your Thunderbolt next time, Turner. I'll turn it into scrap before your coffee's cold." And the insult had burned through the squadron like jet fuel. Hawkeye, a farm kid from Ohio with a mischievous smile and a habit of laughing when things got deadly, had decided then that he'd settle that bet in the sky, not in words. His crew chief, Sergeant Mendoza, had slapped the cowling that morning and said, "She's fat, Captain, but she's mean. Don't forget to use her belly." Hawkeye had grinned, slid the canopy shut, and felt that familiar jolt of fear and exhilaration as 4 tons of Pratt & Whitney engine came alive under him like a roaring bull. The P-47 wasn't pretty like a Spitfire or elegant like a Messerschmitt. It was a brute, a steel jug built to take hits that would rip other planes apart. And somewhere above those clouds, German pilots were laughing about that again. The mission brief had been simple: escort a bomber group on a run toward Rouen, protect them from interception, and if they got bounced, fight smart and bring everyone home. But no plan ever survived contact with the Luftwaffe. Just 20 minutes after crossing the Seine, Hawkeye's wingman, Lieutenant Eddie "Peanut" Dillard, spotted silver specks slicing down through the morning haze. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Focke-Wulfs, lots of them," he yelled over the radio. The formation tightened instinctively, every P-47 driver knowing that in the first seconds discipline meant life. "Roger that," Hawkeye answered, scanning the horizon. He saw them then, sleek FW-190s diving out of the sun, their wings flashing like knives. Cross's voice crackled through the open frequency, thick German accent dripping with confidence. "Ah, the big American pigs are here. Let's see how much bacon they make." Laughter followed, cruel and careless, and Hawkeye's jaw clenched. "Peanut, stay close. No hero moves," he said, but already the sky was breaking into chaos. Tracers zipped past like red bees, bombers scattered, engines screamed. Hawkeye rolled into a climbing turn, the heavy Thunderbolt groaning as G-forces pinned him to the seat. Behind him, Peanut's voice cracked. He's on me," the radio cut off in static. Hawkeye's gut twisted, scanning frantically. "Peanut, break right, damn it." But the sky answered with smoke, black, rising, final. "Son of a bitch," Hawkeye whispered. Then he turned the jug straight toward the sun. Below him, the world blurred. The P-47 might have been mocked, but at full throttle the big radial engine pushed it past 420 miles an hour in a dive, and its 8.50 caliber Brownings were like 8 roaring sermons of American vengeance. Cross's flight curved around like wolves, their leader elegant, almost artistic in his movements, every roll perfect, every burst measured. Hawkeye caught a glimpse of his emblem, a black falcon clutching a cross, and knew it was him. "All right, Cross," he muttered. "Time for the milk cow to trample the rooster." He pulled the trigger. The Thunderbolt shook, wings vibrating with recoil, and 8 streams of fire reached out. One Focke-Wulf peeled away trailing smoke, another exploded in a bloom of orange. "Not bad for a fat pig," Hawkeye shouted, half to himself, half to the ghosts of every pilot who'd been laughed at. The dogfight became a blur of turns, climbs, dives. The heavy Thunderbolt couldn't dance like the German planes, but it could take punishment and give worse. Twice, cannon shells ripped through his wings, each time the armor shrugged them off. Cross came at him head-on, 20 guns flashing, the 2 planes closing at a combined speed of nearly 800 miles an hour. Hawkeye held steady, fired again, felt the guns hammering through the frame, saw sparks rake across the German's nose. Both pulled away at the last second, missing by yards. "You're stubborn, Amerikaner," Cross's voice came again, breathless, angry. "You fly like a drunk bear," Hawkeye laughed, wild and sharp. Yeah, but this bear's still got claws. Minutes stretched into eternity. Fuel gauges dropped. Bombers were long gone, escorted home by the few P-47s still airworthy. It was down to two, the ace who thought himself untouchable and the farm boy who refused to be humiliated. They circled, each waiting for the other to blink. Hawkeye felt sweat trickle down his neck, his left arm numb from G-forces. Cross tried to bait him into a climb. The German's FW-190 could outturn him easily up there, but Hawkeye didn't take it. He dove instead, skimming the treetops so low that branches whipped past the wingtips and Cross followed, his overconfidence blinding him to the trap. "Come on, you arrogant bastard," Hawkeye whispered. "Just a little lower." When he yanked the stick back, the P-47 roared upward like a slingshot. The German tried to follow, but the heavier air at treetop level had cost him speed. Hawkeye rolled over, came down behind him, and squeezed the trigger. 8.50s lit the sky. Bullets chewed through metal and oil and flesh. Cross's plane lurched, belched smoke, and tumbled into the forest below, exploding in a flash that turned morning to dusk for an instant. Silence followed, a heavy, breathless silence broken only by the thunder of Hawkeye's own engine. "For Peanut," he said quietly. When he landed back at the airfield, the ground crew swarmed the battered Thunderbolt. Holes peppered the wings, the tail was shredded and oil streaked across the fuselage, but the big jug was alive. Mendoza stared wide-eyed. "Sweet mother, what you do, take on the whole Luftwaffe." Hawkeye climbed down, trembling with adrenaline, and handed over his helmet. "Just one loudmouth in his fan club," he said, forcing a grin. "They won't be laughing at milk cows anymore." The squadron gathered, slapping his back, half cheering, half staring at the holes that proved what the plane could survive. Lieutenant Harris muttered, "Guess the Krauts finally learned what 850s sound like up close." But later, alone in the debrief tent, Hawkeye stared at Peanut's empty bunk and felt the hollow ache behind victory, the kind that came every time a mission ended with one less voice on the radio. War had a way of mixing triumph and loss until you couldn't tell which was which. He lit a cigarette, stared through the smoke, and whispered, "You'd have liked that, kid." Across the channel, in a dimly lit German command room, intelligence officers argued about the strange new tactics of the American Jug pilots. Reports of P-47 surviving impossible damage circulated among the squadrons. One young officer asked, "Herr Oberst, should we still engage them head-on?" The commander frowned, tapping his pipe. "No. These Thunderbolts, they are not pigs, they are hammers, and they are learning to swing." The remark spread quietly through the Luftwaffe that week, a small crack in the aura of German air superiority. But war was far from over, and even as Hawkeye's squadron toasted their narrow victory that night, word came that the next mission would be deeper, riskier, and deadlier, into territory where flak alone could cut a squadron in half. "Rest while you can," Mendoza told him, patting the plane's nose. "Tomorrow's gonna be hell." Hawkeye exhaled smoke, watching the horizon fade to red, and muttered, "Then we'll bring the storm." The sun rose like a burning coin over the Pacific horizon, bleeding orange across the endless ocean as Lieutenant Jack Hawk Mason pulled his oxygen mask tight, his gloved hand trembling just slightly. Below him, the thick morning fog concealed an armada, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and supply ships crawling toward the Mariana Islands. The radio crackled with static, and then a voice came through, sharp and low. "Eagle Squadron, form up. This isn't a drill." Mason's pulse spiked. This was it, their first major strike against Japanese air power in months. The air smelled faintly of oil and cordite even through the cockpit glass. His P-47 Thunderbolt rumbled like an angry beast, heavy and broad-shouldered, its 8.50 caliber machine guns gleaming under the morning light. "All right, boys," came Captain Reed's voice over comms. "Time to show Tokyo what real horsepower feels like." Mason grinned under his mask. He remembered the jeers from German prisoners months ago, those Thunderbolts, flying refrigerators, and the smug laughter of Luftwaffe pilots who thought agility always beat armor. But as Mason throttled forward, feeling the engine roar beneath him, he couldn't help but think, this fridge breathes fire. The first wave broke through the clouds, and immediately chaos erupted. Japanese Zeros, sleek and agile like wasps, rose from their island base, their white wings flashing red suns. The air filled with smoke trails, the whine of engines, and the crack of machine guns. Mason's wingman, Billy Tex Harper, yelled through the comms, "Bandits at 3 o'clock, 4 of 'em diving fast." Mason banked hard, feeling the Thunderbolt's weight pull at his stomach, and the G-force turned his vision into a tunnel. 1-0 overshot, looping above, and that's when Mason squeezed the trigger. The Thunderbolt's 8 guns thundered in unison, the recoil rattling the entire airframe. The bullets chewed through the Zero's belly, exploding its fuel tank in a blossom of fire. "Splash one!" Mason shouted, but there was no time to celebrate. Another Zero swooped down from behind, riddling his right wing with holes. His gauges danced, oil pressure dropping. Mason cursed and rolled violently, barely avoiding another burst. "Jack, pull up. You've got one on your tail." Tex's voice came through, desperate. Mason yanked back, forcing the Thunderbolt into a steep climb. The Japanese pilot followed, confident, but that was the mistake. The P-47 could climb like a demon, and Mason used its momentum to twist into a stall turn, swinging the nose around just as the Zero passed underneath. He fired again, a roar of .5 zeros, and this time the Zero disintegrated midair. Tex whooped, "Hell yeah, Hawk. You got yourself another." But Mason barely heard him. His eyes were on the ocean below, where one of their own, a rookie named Danny, was spiraling down in flames, screaming for help. Mason tried to dive after him, but Captain Reed barked, "Negative, stay on mission. We can't lose the whole squadron over one man." Mason's jaw clenched, but he obeyed. Discipline was drilled deep, though his heart burned with guilt as Danny's plane vanished beneath the waves. By midday, the dogfight had stretched miles across the Pacific. The Thunderbolts, though slower, proved terrifying in head-on combat. Their thick armor shrugged off hits that would have shredded Mustangs or Lightnings. Mason's guns overheated twice, and his cockpit was littered with bullet fragments, but he was still alive. Between bursts of static, he heard laughter, actual laughter over comms. Tex was hollering, "These Jap boys can't believe what hit 'em. Look at 'em scatter." Mason glanced left. Indeed, the Zeros were breaking formation, regrouping for another run, but their once arrogant movements were hesitant now. The Thunderbolts weren't supposed to be this deadly. And that's when Mason saw something strange, a larger, darker plane circling above the melee. It wasn't a Zero. It had twin engines, a red dragon painted along its fuselage, and it was watching, observing. "Reed, you see that?" Mason radioed. "At 2,000 feet up, that ain't a fighter." Reed squinted through his canopy. "Copy that. Could be a recon or command ship. Don't engage yet." But Mason's gut told him it was more. The mysterious aircraft, later identified as a Kawasaki Ki-45, banked slowly, then turned toward the island. As it disappeared, Mason had a chill crawl up his spine. Whoever was in that plane wasn't done with them. When they finally returned to the carrier, the deck was chaos, wounded men, bullet-riddled planes, and deck crews dragging out smoldering wreckage. Tex landed just before Mason, his gear shot to pieces. When Mason climbed down from his cockpit, the deck officer saluted, eyes wide. "You made it back, sir, barely." Mason laughed tiredly, then noticed his left wing. It had nearly been sheared off. Somehow the Thunderbolt held. "Told you she's a beast," he muttered. That night in the mess hall, the men tried to relax. The sound of ocean waves mixed with low jazz from a radio. Tex was bragging, 3 kills today, hell, I should paint M on my wing." The others laughed, but Mason sat quiet, staring at his untouched food. He kept seeing Danny's burning plane, that brief flash of terror. "Hey," Tex said softly, nudging him, "we can't save everyone." Mason nodded, but his gut told him this wasn't over. The Japanese would strike back harder. The next morning, his fears came true. Before dawn, the sirens blared, enemy bombers inbound. Explosions shook the carrier. Mason rushed to the deck, half-dressed, as flaming debris rained down. A direct hit slammed into the flight line. Men screamed. Mason dove for cover as a fuel tank erupted beside him. He crawled toward his Thunderbolt, desperate to get it off the deck. Tex appeared beside him, face smeared with soot. "Jack, we gotta move now." Together, they hauled open the canopy, and Mason fired up the engine as flames licked across the runway. Overhead, Japanese bombers dropped wave after wave of ordnance. The carrier trembled under the assault, but somehow Mason got airborne. Smoke and shrapnel filled the sky as they climbed through the chaos. His radio crackled. "Eagle Squadron, engage the bombers. Protect what's left of the fleet." Mason's eyes locked on the horizon. 3 formation groups of G-4M Betty bombers escorted by Zeros. The odds were impossible, but he didn't care. He leveled his Thunderbolt and muttered, "Let's give 'em hell." As he closed in, Tex's voice came over comms, laughing wildly through the static. "They called us flying refrigerators. Jack, time to show 'em the ice melts fast." The 2 P-47s dove together, guns blazing. The first bomber burst apart in a storm of metal and fire, raining fragments into the sea. The second caught fire, but before it fell, Mason saw something through his canopy, that same dragon-painted plane, circling again in the distance, watching. He didn't know who the pilot was, or why he seemed to appear at every fight. But one thing was certain, the war had become personal. The storm that rolled in over the Mariana Keys that night seemed to echo the mood aboard the USS Franklin. The sea heaved beneath the carrier, lightning crackled in the distance, and every man aboard knew the Japanese weren't done yet. Lieutenant Jack "Hawk" Mason sat alone in the hangar bay, the rhythmic creak of metal echoing around him as rain hammered the deck above. His Thunderbolt, riddled with shrapnel scars, sat silently beside him, a massive beast sleeping between battles. The mechanics had patched it up again, though Mason wondered how much more punishment the old bird could take. "She'll hold," said Chief Mechanic Samuels, appearing from the shadows with a cigarette hanging from his lip. "That tub's tougher than most of us." Mason smirked, taking the offered smoke, but his eyes were distant. "You ever get the feeling someone's watching you, Sam?" The old mechanic frowned. "In a war like this, someone always is." Mason didn't reply. His thoughts drifted back to that dragon-painted aircraft, that ghostly Ki-45 circling above the battles like a hawk stalking its prey. Whoever flew that plane wasn't just another pilot, they were studying him. By morning, reconnaissance confirmed Mason's fears. Japanese intercepts mentioned an ace known as the Dragon of Iwo, real name Captain Ryuji Takahara, one of the Imperial Navy's most lethal fighter commanders. Reports claimed he'd shot down over 40 Allied planes and had a personal vendetta against the fat American Thunderbirds that had humiliated his unit over Rabaul. Mason's squadron briefing that morning was thick with tension. "Intel says Takahara's squadron operates out of Iwo Jima," Captain Reed said, pointing to a map dotted with red markers. "And they're hunting us. They want payback for the strike." Mason leaned forward. "Then let's not make them wait." The room buzzed, part fear, part anticipation. Tex Harper grinned. "You think this dragon breathes fire, or are we about to barbecue him ourselves?" Laughter broke the tension, but Mason's stomach twisted. He'd seen too much to laugh easily. 2 days later, the operation began. Operation Cobra Fang, a deep strike on Japanese fuel depots near Iwo Jima. It was suicide, but the Thunderbolts were built for punishment, and the Navy wanted to cripple Japan's supply chain before the next invasion. The sky was clear and cruelly blue as Mason's squadron took off at dawn, engines thundering over the open sea. He looked to his right, Tex gave him a thumbs up, and they climbed together into the sun. For nearly an hour, the mission went smooth. The coastline appeared like a strip of green and gold below, smoke plumes from their bombing run already staining the horizon. Mason's bombs hit dead center, a chain of explosions lighting up the fuel dump like the 4th of July. "Direct hit," Tex whooped. But before anyone could celebrate, radar alarms screamed through the cockpits. Multiple bogies inbound high and fast. Out of the sun came 20 Zeros, silver specks growing larger by the second, and at their center the dragon-painted Ki-45. "That's him," Mason muttered. "The dragon." His heart pounded as the sky erupted into madness. Tracers ripped through clouds, planes twisted and dove, and Mason's world narrowed to the thunder of guns and the streaks of smoke. "Eagle Squadron, break formation," Reed shouted, but the enemy was already among them. One of Mason's squadmates exploded into a ball of flame, debris raining down like shrapnel. Mason yanked hard right, his Thunderbolt groaning under the stress. A Zero zipped past and he rolled over, firing a brutal burst that shredded its wing. The Japanese pilot belayed too late. His parachute caught fire before it could open. "Mason, he's on you," Tex yelled. Mason glanced at his 6 and saw it, the dragon-painted twin-engine fighter bearing down, spitting cannon fire. He jerked the stick, bullets lancing past his canopy. The Ki-45 was faster than he expected, elegant, deadly, almost graceful. "That's gotta be him," Mason growled, snapping his Thunderbolt into a climb. The dragon followed, matching every move. For 30 seconds they were locked in a vertical duel, engines screaming, both pilots trying to force the other into a stall. Then Mason pulled a brutal corkscrew dive, a move that would have killed a lesser pilot, and came out behind Takahara. For the briefest moment, the dragon was in his sights. Mason fired. The .50s roared, chewing through air and flame, but the Japanese ace rolled away at the last instant, vanishing into the clouds. The battle raged for nearly an hour, stretching over mountains and sea. Tex's laughter echoed over the radio, but it was strained now. "They just keep coming, Jack. We can't shake 'em." Mason saw his friend take down 2 Zeros before the third rammed straight into him, a kamikaze tactic, desperate and horrifying. Tex's plane went up in fire, spinning down toward the island. Mason screamed into the radio, but only static answered. He felt something crack inside him, grief, fury, disbelief, and all of it fused into one cold, sharp focus. He turned his Thunderbolt toward the dragon-painted Ki-45 circling above. "You're mine now." He climbed through the clouds, following the contrails. For 5 heartbeats the world was silent, then lightning flashed, and the dragon appeared through the mist, his twin guns firing. Mason twisted hard, feeling rounds slam into his fuselage, sparks showering across the canopy. "Come on, girl, hold together," he muttered, coaxing the Thunderbolt through the storm. The 2 planes danced through rain and thunder like dueling spirits. Mason pulled every trick he knew, low dives, high loops. Snap turns, but Takahara matched him move for move. Then by sheer instinct, Mason cut his throttle mid-turn. The Ki-45 overshot, confused for half a second, and that was all Mason needed. He squeezed the trigger. His guns roared and tracers ripped through the dragon's right engine. Smoke poured out, and Takahara's plane wobbled, spiraling downward. Mason followed, watching the Japanese ace struggle for control. As the Ki-45 plummeted toward the coastline, Mason saw the canopy blow open. Takahara belayed out, parachute snapping open against the wind. Mason circled once, low, watching as the Japanese pilot landed on a rocky beach. Through his scope, Mason could see the man clearly, young, with sharp eyes, calm even in defeat. For a moment their gazes met across the war-torn sky. Takahara raised his hand, not in surrender, but in salute. Mason hesitated, then saluted back before banking away. When Mason returned to the carrier, he was silent. Tex was gone, half the squadron was gone. Captain Reed met him on deck, his face drawn. "You got him, didn't you?" Mason nodded slowly. "Shot him down, yeah, but I don't think it's over," Reed frowned. "What do you mean?" Mason looked toward the sunset. "Men like that don't die easy, and I've got a feeling he'll be waiting for me again somewhere." That night, as the storm cleared and stars blinked through the haze, Mason sat by the rail, staring at the endless black of the Pacific. He pulled Tex's dog tags from his pocket, rolling them between his fingers. Behind him, the crew celebrated their victory, but he couldn't join them. Somewhere far away, Takahara was alive and plotting his next move, and Mason knew deep down that their paths would cross again. Because in war, the sky keeps score, and every ace knows the game doesn't end until one of them falls for good. The Pacific dawn was soft and deceptive, painting the sea in gold, hiding the violence that waited just beyond the horizon. On the flight deck of the USS Franklin, Lieutenant Jack "Hawk" Mason climbed into his Thunderbolt, his eyes burning from sleepless nights. The air still smelled faintly of fuel and metal, and his hands shook slightly as he adjusted the throttle. Tex Harper's death hung over him like a ghost, his laughter echoing somewhere in the spaces between engine noise and ocean wind. Mason had flown dozens of sorties since the duel with Captain Ryuji Takahara, the Dragon of Iwo, and though intelligence reported his crash, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that the Japanese ace still lived. The pilots joked that ghosts didn't fly planes, but Mason wasn't laughing. Every time he saw a contrail in the distance, every time a radar pinged for half a second, he felt the same chill run down his spine. He had killed men before, but this one was different. This one felt unfinished. That morning, the mission was simple on paper. Escort bombers to flatten the last remaining Japanese radio installation on Chichijima. But Mason had learned that nothing in this war was simple. As the planes roared off the deck, the sunlight caught the Thunderbolt's wings like mirrors, flashes of silver slicing through clouds. Reed led the formation, Mason flying tight on his right wing. Over the radio, banter flowed, nervous, thin laughter about home, ration coffee, and women they hadn't seen in 2 years. Beneath the jokes was fear, the kind that only pilots knew, that mix of adrenaline and fatalism that made them laugh harder the closer they came to death. "Hawk, you're too quiet," Reed said through the static. "You seeing something?" Mason forced a chuckle. "Just thinking how this sky looks peaceful enough to fool God." Reed laughed. "He ain't fooled, son, not out here." 2 hours into the flight, radar picked up faint contacts, too high to see, moving too fast to be scouts. Mason's stomach nodded. "Captain, we've got company at 11 o'clock, altitude 20,000. Reed's voice hardened. "Copy, everyone tighten up." The bomber cruise below, slow and lumbering, became easy prey for anyone waiting in the clouds. Mason's eyes scanned the horizon, nothing. Then the sun glared off something metallic far above them. 125, then a dozen shapes sliding out of the light like predators. "Zeros," Reed growled. "Scratch that, twin engines too. Oh hell, they brought heavies." The sky erupted a moment later. Machine gun tracers ripped through the formation, the bombers breaking apart as the first salvo hit. "Defensive pattern Charlie," Reed shouted, but it was chaos. Mason saw one bomber disintegrate in a sheet of flame, black smoke spiraling down like an oil slick in the air. "We've got twin-engine fighters with dorsal guns, those ain't regular interceptors," Mason barked. And then he saw it. That familiar silhouette, the dragon-painted Ki-45 with its serpent curling along the fuselage, engines screaming as it dove straight toward the bombers. "He's alive," Mason whispered. "God help us, he's alive." Takahara struck with surgical precision. His first pass shredded a B-24 in seconds, the wings shearing clean off as the bomber's fuel tanks ignited. The radio exploded with cries for help, warnings, static, and prayers. Mason pulled up hard, rolling into the sun, lining up behind the Ki-45. "Reed, I've got him," he yelled. "Stay on target," came the reply. "Don't get drawn off." But Mason's blood roared in his ears. He dove. His 8.50 calibers opened up, the recoil rattling his bones, the tracers stitching through the air like glowing needles. The Ki-45 banked sharply, the Dragon's red insignia flashing as it slipped just outside Mason's sights. "He's faster," Mason muttered, pulling after him, weaving through flak bursts. They danced again, just like before, the same deadly rhythm, but this time the Dragon wasn't alone. 3 Zeros dove in from behind, forcing Mason to break off. "They're swarming me," he shouted. Reed's voice crackled. "Hold on, Hawk, I'm on your 6. Cannon shells tore past his canopy, shattering a wing mirror. Mason flipped the plane upside down, dove through the bomber formation, and came up firing. 1 Zero exploded in front of him, fragments pinging off his fuselage, but the others stayed on him like shadows. "Reed, where the hell are you?" No answer. He glanced down. Reed's Thunderbolt was trailing smoke, spinning toward the sea. Mason swore, teeth gritted. Not again. He looped around, firing at the Dragon, who now hovered like a ghost above the burning bombers. For one breathtaking second, the two men locked eyes through their canopies again. Takahara's expression was calm, almost sad. Then he rolled his fighter, slicing downward, and vanished into cloud cover. Mason followed, punching through vapor and lightning. He emerged into a wall of tracer fire. Takahara had led him straight into an ambush. 4 Japanese fighters waited below, guns blazing. The Thunderbolt shook violently as rounds tore through the fuselage. "I'm hit," Mason shouted. Fuel pressure dropped. He dove for the deck, seawater spraying across his canopy as he skimmed barely above the waves. "Come on, girl, hold together," he hissed. The Japanese planes pursued relentlessly. Mason pulled a desperate move, cutting throttle and rolling sideways so low his wingtips kissed the sea spray. The sudden maneuver threw off his pursuers, one clipping the surface and exploding in foam. Mason hit the throttle again, the Thunderbolt clawing for altitude, smoke trailing behind. He looked back, two still followed. He flipped the safety off his rockets, whispered a prayer and fired. Two white streaks shot backward, slamming into the air where the fighters closed in. A fireball erupted, shockwaves rattling his plane. The last Zero peeled off. When Mason finally limped back toward the carrier group, his fuel gauge was on empty, hydraulics bleeding pressure, wings pocked with bullet holes. He barely made the landing, the hook catching the wire at the last second. Crewmen rushed forward, dragging him from the cockpit. "Reed," he gasped. Samuels looked away. "Didn't make it, son. His chute never opened." Mason dropped to his knees, hands trembling. The hangar fell silent as the surviving pilots gathered, fewer than half who had taken off that morning. The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Today's losses are severe, but the mission succeeded. The target was destroyed." No one cheered. That night Mason stood on the deck, the ocean black beneath him. He could still see the dragon silhouette burned into his mind. Somewhere out there, Takahara was alive, victorious. And Mason knew this wasn't just war anymore. It was personal. He thought of Tex, Reed, all the men gone. He lit a cigarette, staring into the horizon. "You can keep your ghost." Below decks, intelligence confirmed his instinct. Radio intercepts from Iwo Jima mentioned Takahara's Squadron K's regrouping for Operation Tenma, a planned counterstrike on the U.S. carrier group itself. They weren't retreating, they were coming. Mason folded the report silently, eyes cold. Then let him come. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as the waves crashed against the hull and lightning flickered across the sky, Mason's reflection in the dark water almost seemed to twist, half his face lit by moonlight, half lost in shadow, a soldier staring into the abyss, waiting for the next move, knowing that the dragon wasn't done breathing fire yet. Dawn came red and violent over the Pacific, a bleeding horizon that made the sea look like molten metal. On the deck of the USS Franklin, Lieutenant Jack Hawk Mason stared out toward Iwo Jima, where dark smoke rose like a black hand clawing at the sky. The air stank of fuel, salt, and something heavier, expectation. Word had spread through the fleet. Operation Tenma had begun. The Japanese were throwing everything they had left into one final, desperate strike, and the Dragon of Iwo, Captain Ryuji Takahara, was leading it himself. Mason stood beside his battered Thunderbolt, its nose painted with a small lightning bolt in memory of Tex Harper, its fuselage scarred, patched, and ready for one more fight. Chief Samuels handed him his flight gloves with quiet gravity. "You sure you're ready for this one, son?" Mason managed a grim smile. "Doesn't matter if I'm ready. It's coming anyway." The ship's loudspeakers blared. All pilots to stations. Enemy approaching. Estimated contact in 10 minutes. The deck exploded into motion, men shouting, engines roaring, the metallic chorus of a fleet preparing for doomsday. Mason climbed into the cockpit, sealing the canopy with a snap that echoed like a closing door to the world he knew. The carrier's deck tilted as waves rolled under, and the first Thunderbolt screamed into the air, forming silver V's against the crimson dawn. Mason's heart hammered as his P-47 surged forward. Then he was airborne, the deck vanishing beneath him. He climbed into formation with the remaining squadron, barely a dozen pilots left from the once mighty group. Static crackled in his headset. "Hawk, this is Viper Leader. We've got bogies on approach vector 210, low and fast." Mason squinted, then saw them, black dots multiplying across the horizon, dozens of them, a wave of aircraft cutting through the sunlight like locusts. Kamikazes, Zeros, and there, the unmistakable twin-engine silhouette, dragon-painted, leading the charge. "There you are," Mason muttered. "Come to finish it, huh?" The two forces collided above the waves in a storm of gunfire, smoke, and burning fuel. The air turned into chaos, thunderbolts diving, zeros looping, machine guns stitching death into the clouds. Mason's 8.50 spat fury, downing 2 attackers before they could reach the carrier group. But the Japanese came in relentless waves, disciplined and fearless, each one seemingly willing to die. Over the radio, panic voices screamed, "He's diving on the bridge. I can't shake him. Mayday." May cut short by explosions. Mason pulled hard into a climbing roll, tracers flashing past his canopy. Below him, one kamikaze smashed into the destroyer Hancock, fire erupting across the deck. The sea turned into a mirror of hell. And through it all, Takahara flew like a phantom, weaving between fire and smoke, directing his men with perfect precision. His dragon-painted Ki-45 seemed untouchable, darting through flak bursts and tracers like a spirit of vengeance. Mason saw him cut down 2 Thunderbolts with clinical efficiency. "All units break left. Focus on the twin engine," he shouted. "That's their leader." The surviving Americans formed a loose pincer, trying to corner the dragon. But Takahara anticipated every move, flipping his plane into impossible climbs, rolling through their gunfire. He seemed to dance through chaos, every move poetry, every burst of cannon fire a signature. Mason broke off pursuit, letting instinct take over. "You want me, you bastard. Let's end it." He climbed into the sun, banking wide, waiting. The dragon bit the bait, rising after him. At 30,000 feet, the world grew silent. The ocean below was a distant shimmer, and above them nothing but sky and destiny. Mason throttled back, cut to half speed, and rolled inverted, the Thunderbolt's massive weight fighting him every inch. The dragon followed, guns flashing, shells tearing past Mason's tail. One round clipped his wing, spraying sparks. He bit his lip, tasting blood, and yanked the stick into a hammerhead stall. The P-47 hung for a heartbeat, then fell. The dragon dove after him. Both planes plunged through the clouds like meteors, engines screaming. Mason leveled out just above the water, pulling 5 GS, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. Come on, he saw the dragon's shadow above him, closing fast. Then he flipped the master arm. Time to see who's got more fire in their gut. Mason rolled out, lined up, and squeezed the trigger. 8.50s roared. The tracers ripped through the air, a blinding river of lead. They struck home 1-2, then all 8 connecting. The Ki-45's right engine exploded in a bloom of fire. Smoke and debris streaked across the sky, but Takahara didn't break off. Even burning, he stayed on target, returning fire with his cannons. Mason's canopy shattered. Glass slashed his cheek. Warning lights flared red across the dash. "You stubborn son of a," he grunted, wrenching the stick as the 2 planes tangled in a deadly spiral. For a moment, it was impossible to tell who was chasing who, just 2 wounded birds locked in a final death dance. Then at the last second, the dragon's engine seized. Flames engulfed the fuselage. Takahara's canopy burst open. Mason saw him for a heartbeat, face calm, hand steady. Then the Ki-45 rolled over and plunged into the sea. The impact sent up a geyser taller than a house. The fireball mirrored in Mason's cracked canopy. Silence followed. Just wind, smoke, and the faint hum of the dying engine. Mason exhaled, hands trembling. "It's over," he whispered, but he didn't believe it. He banked once, low over the waves, where only foam and oil slicks marked the dragon's grave. He saluted. "You were one hell of a pilot." Back aboard the Franklin, the battle still raged, but the tide had turned. Without Takahara's leadership, the Japanese attack faltered. The remaining kamikazes fell short, shot down by anti-aircraft fire or intercepted by the few Thunderbolts still airborne. When Mason landed, the crew cheered, though their faces were streaked with soot and exhaustion. Captain Reed's replacement clapped him on the shoulder. "You got him, Hawk. The dragon's gone. You ended it." Mason nodded numbly. "Maybe." He glanced toward the horizon, where the smoke still curled upward like ghosts rising to heaven. Or maybe the war just traded one ghost for another. That night, under the flickering glow of damage control lamps, Mason sat alone in the hangar beside his battered plane. Samuels approached quietly, handing him a flask. To Tex, to Reed, to the boys who didn't come back. Mason took a long drink, the whiskey burning through the fog in his chest. "To them," he said. "And to him," Samuels frowned. "Him, Mason stared into the dark. The dragon, man like that doesn't really die. He just becomes part of the sky. The old mechanic didn't argue. He just nodded and walked away, leaving Mason with the silence of cooling metal and the distant rumble of the waves. Weeks later, as the Pacific War wound down, Mason flew one last patrol over Iwo Jima, now held by U.S. Marines. Below, scorched wrecks and silent airfields stretched across the island, the ghosts of a war that refused to rest. As he turned for home, the radio crackled unexpectedly, a faint, almost broken voice. Japanese, heavily accented English: "Thunderbird, you fly well until next sky." Mason froze. "Who is this?" Static. Then silence. The hair on his arms rose. He looked out over the endless horizon, where the sun was setting in blood-red light. For a moment, he could almost swear he saw it, a twin-engine shadow rising in the distance, faint, shimmering, impossible. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Rest easy, Dragon," he whispered, banking his Thunderbolt toward home. "Guess some fights don't end, they just fade into the clouds." And as the last light of day vanished behind him, the ocean below swallowed the echoes of war, two warriors, enemies, equals, leaving only contrails above the Pacific, twin streaks crossing paths one last time, disappearing into the dying sun.